I've been thinking a lot about this for the past year, and it's brought me a lot of mixed feelings on things. This was originally going to be a video just analyzing a specific series, but as I thought and wrote more, it grew into something completely different. When The Fruit of Evolution originally came out in 2021, I really wanted to make a video on it. It was something that I found really enjoyable to watch, it made a lot of really good jokes, and had a lot of enjoyable references, which the most notable one to me was Dragon Quest. It also had a fairly good dub, despite some of the scenes adding way more dialogue than the original. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a video that I couldn't make no matter how much I tried, since the only thing I could talk about was major spoilers or how on the nose its jokes were. Eventually, I gave up and scrapped what little of a script I had, since it was impossible to make in my style. At least, that was the case, up until the second season came out during my hiatus. On my first watch of it, I went into it like I did the first season, but eventually came to the realization that you shouldn't view it like that. It's something that I noticed only in hindsight, though. You see, Season 1 parodied a lot of the more interesting tropes you can find within isekai, and there's many different directions you can take a story, even if you copied a different series one-to-one, just to make a very blatant joke. However, that season did its own thing while not getting too involved with the jokes, to where the final product that we got was a fairly unique anime that could be enjoyed without even knowing what it was making fun of. People might not agree with that because of the different opinions we all have towards parody, but it was way more enjoyable to me than something that the community gives high praise towards, like Konosuba. The problem with watching the second season this way is the fact that it's a parody of a completely different genre, the Magic Academy. In short, that season was awful. Don't get me wrong, I do like the Magic Academy genre, but that is really not one that you can parody the same way you can isekai, especially considering how different isekai handles Magic Academies compared to the genre itself. Each series within it might have some shared tropes, but the way these series are written make it highly restrictive to where the tropes themselves can't be applied the same way to different series, at least not easily. It's restricted even further if they include more specialized writing devices within the series as well. In a lot of ways, the Magic Academy genre is similar to slice of life. However, it is something that's so steeped in fantasy, it's usually a device to carry out more serious in tone stories, while slice of life tends to be more out there in some form to separate you from the pain that is life. Because of this very tiny difference, parody is completely shifted in how it needs to be executed to work right. I only bring this particular part up to express that you need to factor in a bit more work than normal if what you're wanting to add into your story generally fights against the tone of the genre. It's not a golden rule or anything, but in some circumstances it could be the very thing that solidifies a series as good or bad. I've seen my fair share of Magic Academy series, and the only ones out there that I felt really had any sort of success with anything comedic was stuff that could either properly balance the comedy to lighten up the heavier parts of the story, or was an ever-present existence in its writing. With how the genre is more serious in nature, when jokes come up I find them to be distracting in most cases. For this reason, I generally view more comedic Magic Academies in a negative light. To give you an idea of what I'm saying, I'll use the Misfit of Demon King Academy as an example. I don't particularly see this one as bad, but it was a series where I actively lost enjoyment with every joke that is told. Every time I got back to where I was enjoying it, because the series has this really cool and interesting world set out for us, Anos would just come out of left field and ruin it with a particularly awful one-liner. With how frequent jokes were in that series, I ended up groaning through most of them, though I will say I ended up laughing a few times towards the end of the first season, but I don't know if it was because those were slightly better than what was there originally, or they were actually good jokes. My brain was already tired of the series by that point. To make matters worse, that particular series also adopts the overpowered protagonist writing device, and I feel like it would have been better if it didn't have that, solely because a lot of these jokes, in some form, are about Anos' strength. There's only so many times you can stomach the same joke before it becomes not funny anymore. The ironic thing is that this series is kind of the antithesis of one of my favorite series of all time, at least under this specific topic. Akashic Records of Bastard Magic Instructor is essentially the same kind of series, but it is an example of what I find to be a perfect balance between serious and comedy. I can pretty much compare every aspect of this to the Misfit of Demon King Academy and say that it's better, even down to the jokes about the protagonist's character. The main difference between these two is like night and day because of how the jokes themselves are catered to the series. In both series, the protagonist is usually the focus of the jokes in some form or another, but the jokes in Akashic Records land better because of how they're carried by Glenn. I genuinely find it to be pretty insulting when something is labeled as a comedy series, but the jokes you come across most is just the fact that the target of the joke is infallible. It can be done well, like the few good ones in the latter half of the Misfit of Demon King Academy, but I personally find the instances of that is far and few in between. Comedic balance is a very crucial thing, and something being heavily on one side will only ruin it in most cases. To step back towards the original topic a bit, I'll talk a little about one of the most well-known Magic Academy series out there, the Irregular at Magic High School. You may think, Vel, why are you bringing this up when this is a series that's played straight? But that's part of the reason why. I need to discuss a little bit of its popularity, since it's probably the anime that comes to mind when most people think about this genre and its tone, especially with how a lot of other stories take from its tropes. The Irregular at Magic High School has always been a series that I've seen discussed in a very mixed light, but I personally really enjoy it. It's not something amazing, but it's fairly consistent with what it does, and that's part of why it's so popular. With its popularity, it inspired more people to contribute to the genre, but some of those took things from it and applied them incorrectly, and that's where I'm leading with this. Everyone has probably seen at least one of these lower tier Magic Academy series that fumbles things, whether it be in one instance that lowers your enjoyment, or multiple to the degree that it destroys your entire experience. Whether it's something minor like very obvious villains being employed in the Academy, to something more major, like a terribly done Deus Ex Machina, those moments just add up. The price the community pays after a while is an overall negative opinion towards good tropes because they're not implemented well. This might have been long-winded and seemed unimportant up to this point, but you really need all of this for context with where I'm going. The Fruit of Evolution Season 2 parodies the Magic Academy genre, which I specifically believe is making fun of the lower-tiered ones. It takes a lot of tropes you've likely seen time and time again, as well as some tropes that are used in normal school series, and incorporates them into the story in some pretty bad ways, though a few are done relatively well. It starts out good, despite hitting you with the trope where they spoil the end of the season in the first episode. You don't really pay any mind to that part at first, because it was on brand for the series with how it's presented, and makes you feel like nothing's different from the first season. But as you go deeper, you start noticing more and more things going wrong with the writing. Going through the season will mentally exhaust you. The consistency that was there just isn't anymore, and you end up wondering what went wrong. What started out with the series as joy for me progressively became more painful as one of the worst things I've ever watched when getting closer to the end, and it never dawned on me until it was already over that it was parodying the Magic Academy genre at all. Because of how the series presented itself, I had my brain disconnected from that fact, but thinking back, it all made sense as to why I felt this way. With the first season, at some point the comedy and jokes don't become as frequent, so you start thinking of it as its own thing, and your brain gets primed to think that its next part of the story would be the same. Even the Magic Academy bits at the end of the first season didn't seem like it was parodying the genre, so I never thought in my wildest dreams that this next part would parody anything. It sucks you in only to slap you at the end with the worst of all the Magic Academy tropes in Season 2, just to show you how much of a joke the entire section of this story is. People might think that it's crazy to be thinking about it this way, but hear me out. I'll point to the other series by the same author to show you why I think that. I got a cheat skill in another world and became unrivaled in the real world too is really similar to the first season of the Fruit of Evolution, so much so that it wouldn't be a wrong thing to say that it has the same exact kind of start for the protagonist. Only differences are that it's played completely straight and the fact that it's a pseudo isekai. It's even structured in a way that feels like the author tried to do the same exact thing, but with a more serious tone, and that's shown very clearly out the gate with how both series handle the protagonist being fat. With this fact in mind, I realized two things about the author. They understand the genres that they're working with to an impressive degree, but they're also not very good at serious writing. However, these works both shared really interesting world building and, in my opinion, likable characters, so there's another strength that they have to their style. It's also worth noting that, while the overall writing was worse, the series managed to stay fairly consistent, just like the Fruit of Evolution. All of this is what leads me to believe that the Magic Academy arc of the Fruit of Evolution was made to be garbage, and honestly, I respect it for that. It's possible that the author initially wanted this arc to be a bit more serious to match the genre tone, but with how jokey the series is, it feels like it could have been written into a corner. At times it does feel like it's trying to play itself straight with how things develop, but at the same time, the jokes often get in the way. The season carries itself a lot like the previous one, but the overall plot for this one is really not something that easily works with comedy. It might sound solid on paper, but in execution it fell really flat. Stuff like this is what messed with my mind for a long time, and it's why I still feel so mixed on the series as a whole. Even with how much of a sour taste the initial watch put into my mouth, it's one of those series that I can look back on fondly and laugh at because it had a lot of good to it no matter how much of a train wreck it became. It's why I can continue looking at it in a positive light despite it ending on such a bad note. I also must emphasize that the ending is solely why I dislike this season so much. The ironic thing is that when you look back on the series after watching it like that, you can't not laugh at it because of how it tackled the genre as a whole. It took on like an entire checklist of tropes for Magic Academies and presented them in a way that you just can't help but laugh at. My second watch of this anime was one of the most entertaining experiences I've ever had after realizing that. As weird as it is to say, the objectively right way to go into watching this anime is with the knowledge that it is a very on-the-nose parody of the Magic Academy genre, because if you don't, you just end up being disappointed. This season was nothing like its first one, and you really can't continue with it the same way. This is why the Fruit of Evolution Season 2 comes out to be a perfect joke. Depending on how you saw it, it could be a good or bad joke, but we can all agree that it is one. Despite all that though, it is not as good as the first season since it goes too far into the comedy by comparison and ends up feeling not as memorable. I'll never read the novels, but if this series ever saw a season 3, I'd still watch it to see how it shapes up since this series does make me laugh quite a bit even during its lows. Before I go, I thought it'd be a perfect way to wrap up this video by just telling how I feel about the season without all the roundabout wording. It wasn't terrible, but I can't say that it was good no matter how much of a comedic masterpiece it is. The story was heavily affected by the comedic choices it decided to do, and I really wish that its author was better with doing more serious things, because this part of the story could have been great if it actually felt like what it was making fun of like the first season did. It ends up as an anime that's full of laughs but lacking in its own identity. A lot of the unique elements from the previous season did make a comeback for this one, but they really didn't make it any better, which is a testament to how much of a doomed idea this arc was. If it wasn't for the last 2 or so episodes of the season, I would have seen it in a much better light. It wouldn't have been as good as the first one, but at least you wouldn't have a terrible ending. You truly need to watch this for yourself just to see how much of a train wreck it is, because my words can't describe it well enough. If I had to rate this anime with a number score from that alone, it would have been a 2, which is the lowest score I've ever considered giving anything.